Good afternoon and welcome to this special Brainwaves webinar in our adolescent mental health series. This is to discuss the very initial findings from the Brainwaves pilot cohort study. My name is Julian Turner. I'm the Director of Education at Brainwaves. And I'm just going to start by saying a little bit about what Brainwaves is for people who are new to the project. Brainwaves is a unique project that combines a cohort study for 16 to 19-year-olds, so children in year 12, 13, and for the first time shortly, some children who have left school. Those children are pupils at our special research school partners, and from that we are collecting data about well-being and mental health. That's one part of it, that's the research part, but there's also an educational part to Brainwaves as well, and we produced a number of lessons for well-being to help students to take a more active involvement in their own mental health and well-being. Those are free to everyone, free to all, as is this webinar. So part of our ethos is this combination of research and working practically with schools to support well-being, and try to do the two things in combination. And I'm delighted to have today two of our leading academics, and I'm very pleased to see my colleagues, John Gallagher, who is Professor of Cognitive Health, the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oxford. John is an expert on brain health and the use of big data in medical research, and he is Director of the Brainwaves cohort study into adolescent mental health. Good evening, John.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming.
And also, I'd like to welcome Professor Sarah Bauermeister. Sarah Bauermeister is the Senior Scientist for Brainwaves. Sarah is a cognitive neuropsychologist and epidemiologist, and she's leading several large-scale research studies into brain health, including around dementia, early life adversity, and mental health. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, good evening, and I'm looking forward to the webinar.
Wonderful. Now, this is slightly different, this webinar, from the other ones we've done. So this is very much a live event. So I'm delighted to see so many of you attending live. And while we are recording this session, as we normally do, we will not be posting it until later in the year. And we do ask people not to record the session locally or to share it or share screenshots. And there's a very good reason for this, which is that today we are talking about really very early stage findings of a very early stage project. So we've just completed our pilot data collection, and the project is going to grow and grow over many years. That data that we've collected has not been through the normal academic processes as yet. So normally we would expect all of our data, all of our research, all of our findings to be peer reviewed and then published. But that process takes considerable time. And part of our commitment at Brainwaves is really to have a conversation between academic researchers and practitioners in schools. And in that spirit, we don't want to wait for that. We wanted to give you some early indications of sort of what the sorts of things we're finding, but that is a sort of a trusted conversation. And after the data has been peer reviewed, then we will put it up on our website. So those are the sort of the ground rules. We very, very much encourage you to use the chat, and in particular, if you've got a question, you'll see at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A button with a question mark in it. Please use the Q&A button for asking questions. It makes it a little bit easier for us to organize how we respond to them, but you're absolutely welcome to use the chat. And I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome to people for whom this is their first Brainwaves webinar. It's really wonderful to see you. And we've been running these webinars for well over a year now, and we've been creating essentially a community of school practitioners and academics interested in the well-being of young people. And our shared goal is to improve the life outcomes for those young people. That's what we're really all about here. So in that spirit, we'd love to hear about how you respond to this data, how it concords with your experience, and we'll have a discussion later about what it means for schools and how we can really build on it. So with that said, first of all, I'm going to ask John to start by explaining what the purpose was of doing this pilot study and what we're trying to do with this data. John.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Well, once again, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. This is a very special occasion for us. The point of brainwaves is really to be able to study adolescent well-being and mental health at scale. That involves, some sort of technology development. It involves us working out how best to engage with the young people as well as collect their data. And so we've engaged in what we would describe as a proof of concept study. So the exam question is, can we collect large amounts of data in a short period of time? And over a 3-week period, we managed to get over 7,000 young people to join this study. So that was really, really exciting. It wasn't just that they joined, but they provided data that we could then take into our secure data environment and then begin to analyze, which is what we're going to show you today. But it's one little thing about the design of the study that is probably helpful to understand. If you're going for a study which is very, very large, you don't spend a lot of time on trying to make sure that every section of the population is equally represented. Because if you do that, then the study is no longer feasible. It becomes very expensive, and the logistics really don't work. But what you do is design a study so that you have the full range of values that you're measuring. Now, what does this mean? This means that when we show a distribution of, say, anxiety or depression or whatever it might be, that distribution is not an exact reflection of the general population. But when we show an association, looking at the change in, say, anxiety with the change in social networking, that line is a pretty good representation of what's going on in the wider world. So as you look at these figures, please make that distinction that we are not looking at exactly what the population is like, but we get a pretty reasonable idea, but we are getting a very good idea about what the associations are like.
Great, thank you, thank you. So Sarah, over to you now. I'm going to ask you to take us through the study and look at the here we go. Sorry, I'm just going to look at the distributions of some of these of the samples. So this is the study, the trends in adolescent mental health. So please talk us through what you found in terms of who took part.
Okay, well, thank you again very much. This is really exciting to be able to present some of these, as John said, extremely preliminary look at the data. So over a 3-week period, as John said, we had over 7,606 young people were logged onto our system. And out of those 7,600, over 7,000 provided some sort of data. So that is consent and questionnaire. So with all studies, we have a little bit of loss where people log on, decide not to, or log on and simply just read it and do not complete all the data or all the questions. So on the next slide, these are distributions, like John said. And as you can see, the predominant age that we were in our pilot study was 17, but we also had a range of some 16, 18, and a few 19-year-olds as well. So this just shows the distribution of the age that we were sampling for this pilot study. Over here, we can see the distribution of female to male, approximately, I would say 50-50, and with slightly more females than males, and a few who chose neither of these categories. And here we come on to gender. They were able to record their gender. And we had, out of female, 94% identified the same as their birth gender, and males 97%. And we did have some who chose to identify as the opposite sex of birth, 2% for female and 5% for male. So here we move on to, again, this is distribution. And we look at exercise according to sex. Now, if we look at the purple, that is the approximate distribution of everybody. And we can see that this varies from never to yearly, monthly, weekly, going all the way to most days. And out of those, we can see that most people are actually exercising weekly or most days. And in the pink, we can see these are where females are reporting more within that category than males. And then if we look at the end at most days, we can see that it's the males, colored as blue, who are actually saying, well, they exercise most days. And so they are reporting that more than females in that most days column. And now we come to sleep. Now, this was a question which asked the young people, do you have enough sleep to fulfill your daily activities? On the left, we have the females who predominantly said no over yes. And on the right-hand side, we can see that actually males reported the opposite, that in general, they reported, yes, they do have enough sleep compared to those who said no. Now here we move on to anxiety, again, just to emphasize that this is just a distribution of the population that we sampled, and we can see that this varies between very low anxiety level on the left, which is 0, going all the way up to 20, which is more higher level of anxieties. And according to split at the top, according to female and male, we can see that generally males are reporting less anxiety than the trend for females on the right-hand side. Very similar for depression. So we've got the same, we've got the general distribution with most people reporting a lower level to over around that 5 value, over to those who have more a higher level of depression across to the level of 15, and males again reporting that lower value than females. Moving on to well-being.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
That's okay.
Skipped one.
Now, are we doing well-being? No. Okay, we're moving on to agency. Now, agency is where we're asking young people, do they feel they have control over decisions? Or and here we see that this is predominantly pushed towards the other side of the scale, with males reporting more higher agency than females, whereas females are reporting towards the lower side of the scale, which is on the left-hand side. Again, this is just a distribution. Well-being. Now, when we looked at depression and anxiety, this was flipped around the other way, because here we have well-being on the left-hand side is lower, and on the right-hand side is higher well-being. And again, which is a little bit opposite to the depression, anxiety, the males are reporting slightly higher levels of well-being than the females on the left. Now, resilience is a very interesting one because those other distributions were quite evenly spread across that bottom axis. But this time we have the resilience clustered more around the middle, and then we have these few outlying points which happen to be male. So either very low resilience or high resilience. And this is something that we would really like to look into a little bit more. Why is this distribution clustered around the middle? And why are these what we call outlying points predominantly male, with the clusters in the middle? So this is resilience, and this needs further investigation. Onto social media. We hope that we've recorded all of the social media platforms. And as you can see, the most popular platforms are Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, WhatsApp, and YouTube. And those are reflected by the use. So here we were simply asking young people, how frequently, what are the platforms that they most frequently use? And we go to look at networking. And again, we're back to that sort of even distribution. And this is the hours spent on social media per day. And this ranges from a few in the zero all the way up to, this is actually 8+ hours a day. And as we can see, again, looking at that split between female and male, we see that males are reporting slightly on the lower side of social media use than females, which are more distributed up towards the higher hours per day. And the interesting group for us as mental health researchers are those people reporting in that 8 hours plus, to understand what is the impact on mental health and what exactly are they doing on social media. But this is for the future. And now we move to gaming, and this time we see that the males are more tending to spend more hours per day on gaming, as distributed from 2 hours a day plus all the way up. And the females heavily weighted on that naught category. So they might be on social media, but not necessarily gaming. And again, this is really something that we'd like to look into a little bit further.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great. And I think, John, you're going to talk about now how some of the associations in the data. Is that right?
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for that introduction, Sarah. One of the things that we think is distinctive about brainwave is that in this being a response to the mental health crisis in young people, our response to this is to work out the value of demedicalizing the problem. So, you know, if you think of somebody who has very severe anxiety or depression, they really do need the support of healthcare professionals. For the large majority of the population, that's not appropriate, but they still may suffer high levels or higher than they wish levels of anxiety and depression. So we've been looking at other ways of approaching this, and we are looking at how, if we give the young people information, if we can empower them to make wise lifestyle decisions, they become, in one sense, like the masters of their own mental health. And we can hopefully shift the whole population distribution, as we've described it, towards better outcomes. So these next data are really interesting from this point of view, because what we're looking at here is the association, the relationship between agency, going across the bottom, and self-reported health, being the left-hand graph, and self-reported mental health, being the right-hand graph. And as you can see, there's a very clear association that the stronger your sense of agency, your ability to make decisions, take responsibility for yourself, the better your self-reported health and the self-reported mental health. Well, that's great, but let's see if we can, go on and then see what else we find. So let's look at agency. and anxiety and depression. And we can break this down by sex. So if we look at the left-hand graph, we have agency and its impact on anxiety. Now, the interesting thing here is that although the blue line, which represents the Association for Females, is higher than the red line, that's not surprising in the sense that girls have more, they express a stronger, if you like, baseline level of agency than do boys. But what is interesting is that the lines run virtually in parallel. So whatever your baseline level, whatever the level of anxiety you have, the more agency you have, it just brings it down equally for boys and for girls. This is a really important finding. Do we see the same in depression? Yes, we do. Again, the higher baseline levels are explain that the slope is above the red slope. The blue slope is above the red slope. But nevertheless, the actual change in levels is exactly the same for both sexes, and is this lovely, clear relationship. So we find that agency is associated with good self-reported health, good self-reported mental health, less anxiety, and less depression. Okay. If we look at well-being, and unsurprisingly, really, what we're really saying here is that all of our associations are consistent with the idea that if you empower young people with the right information to make good lifestyle decisions, they are in a better position to manage their well-being than by just looking at those who have great needs. It's not that you don't look at those with great needs, of course you do. They deserve and should get specialist support. But if you're trying to help the entire population, then you have to look at what affects the entire population. And here we see that agency is associated with many, many beneficial effects. So, okay, here's an interesting one. What about time socially networking? Well, here we look at, again, anxiety on the left, depression on the right. And it's very clear that for both boys and girls, the more time you spend social networking, the higher your levels of anxiety and higher your levels of depression. Why this is, we do not know. Okay, so I'm not pretending that we have a magic bullet here to provide answers. What I am saying is we have information which directs us to ask really important questions. All right, and these results are very consistent across the whole range of social networking, and for both for boys and for girls. This is an interesting one. I particularly like this one. So this is the value of exercise. Okay, exercise is good for the heart. It's good for the brain. Actually, it's good for the feelings as well. And we can see here that the more you exercise, the lower your anxiety levels are. For girls, it's more or less a straight line. For boys, it actually has most effect at higher levels of exercise. I don't know what this reflects. I know that I have a grandson who is only really at peace, so to speak, when he's running around like a crazy thing. So whether there is a chromosomal effect here, I do not know. If we look at depression, again, a straight line down, so to speak, for girls, and the slightly curved impact for boys. And the next one, Julian, please. Okay. So is exercise good for you in terms of an overall sense of well-being, emotional well-being? We know it makes you feel good. Your body feels good because of all the endorphins, etc., due to exercise. But this has an overall effect of well-being. And here we can see that there is a definite upslope associated with more exercise levels. So again, it's very helpful to get out and be active. Okay, let's look at sleep. Sarah showed us earlier that the more girls are reporting poorer sleep than boys. Does this affect anxiety and depression? Well, on the left-hand side, we can see it really does. That although the absolute levels are lower for boys, of course they are, because they report better sleep. Nevertheless, the difference between in anxiety between those who report adequate and inadequate sleep between boys and girls is the same. For depression, it's very, very similar. There is a real strong association between having adequate sleep and feeling good. And the next one, please. Oh, so if we can, before we go to any questions, I just want to make the point that, you know, if you really want to help young people feel good and much better, get active and get a good night's sleep. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's great. So we've got some questions developing, but I want to, while we're just waiting for those to build up, I wanted to talk a little bit about this question of agency, which you show is so important in being positively correlated with well-being. And agency, as we described, is this idea that young people have a sense that they have influence over their own decisions and over what happens to them. So could we launch a poll? We've got a poll. We're very, very interested to know to what extent you think your school deliberately tries to cultivate agency in young people as a deliberate strategy. So we'll give a few minutes for people to answer, or a few seconds, I should say, for people to answer. I think it's a very interesting question because I'm not sure that it is often seen as a goal in itself in my experience. Okay, can we have the results of that poll? Very interesting. So we've got there you are, you've got a nice normal distribution, Sarah. That's what you like to see, isn't it? So we've got most people saying to a moderate extent. So in other words, it is something you're thinking about. Some people not at all, some people to a great extent. So that's great. So I think it would be really interesting if during the course, the next few minutes, if there are things that you're doing in order to promote agency amongst your young people, please do share those in the chat and we can pick some of those things up later. Now, and actually there is and Natalie Palmer has asked a question about how one might suggest increasing young person's sense of agency. So let's come back to that when people have had a chance to talk about some of the things that they're doing. But in the meantime, Joe Downey asks, how did you measure agency? What was the nature of the question? Is that an established inventory, or is it something that you had to construct?
Shall I speak? Shall I answer to that? Okay. So thank you for the question. So throughout brainwaves, we try to use established scales because then we can do comparability with existing studies. And for agency, we actually used a questionnaire called the Youth Empowerment Scale. And this is a series of around 8 questions which asks about the child's agency, not only within the family and parents, but also at school. If you want an example of a question, I pulled it up very quickly. And one says, I can speak up in class when I have a comment or question. That's an example from a school question. And from the family, my parents or guardians ask for my opinion on things. So there you go.
Thank you, Sarah. And then Rachel Richards asks, what do your findings on agency say about the impact of schools that have strong uniform rules and discipline? So I'm going to answer that because I'm also to say that in our pilot study, we had 19 schools take part because we were testing our systems and processes. In November, there will be nearly 40 schools taking part in the November data collection. So there'll be a much wider range of schools, but we would need to get to a significantly larger number of schools in order to investigate some of the very interesting questions that you raised there, Rachel, around school culture and things like uniform and codes of discipline and so on. I think that is a really interesting area for future research, but it's not something that we can comment on at the moment from our existing data. Maria is asking about whether if people have too much sleep, does it affect anxiety or depression? Is there a sort of an optimal level of sleep? Did you find that, Sarah?
I think I'll hand that one over to John.
So it's a really good question. Sleeping what you might describe as too much, and that's probably around sort of 8, 9, 10 hours a day, is associated with low mood. So I think that if you're sleeping 10 hours a day, now I think there's something wrong there. Most people recommend that between 7 to 8 hours is normally what most people need. But of course, even within that, there are differences. For example, I only need 6 hours sleep these days, whereas 30 years ago it was definitely 7.5. So you've got to allow for individual variation, but at the extreme ends of these distributions, there would be cause for concern.
Thank you. And actually, we've got a comment here in the chat from Lorraine, who says that their mental health first aid has noticed a big difference in the performance and the mood of learners who are sleep deprived. So that's something that finding rings true with your experience. So thank you very much for that comment. There's that in the chat, if you look in the chat, there is also a link to the free Brainwaves resources. These are all completely free. We're building out a whole curriculum. It's not complete yet. We are dependent on future funding for our ability to do that. But we're adding to it all the time. And I'm delighted that actually our most used lesson in the last month was the Key Stage 3 lesson on the foundations of positive psychology, which is great. But do please have a look at the lessons that you'll find in the link that Tara has posted. I mention that because Jackie mentions that you use the PERMA framework, the positive psychology framework, which is the same one that Brainwaves uses in mental health awareness days, raising awareness of those amongst young people. So that's great. We actually have 7 pillars to our curriculum. PERMA, which stands, as many of you will know who have attended our series on PERMA, will know stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And if you go back and you look at the Brainwaves website, you'll see the individual webinars given by experts on each of those and how they can be used to promote well-being in schools. And there's lots of good stuff there, but great to see that you're doing assemblies on that in schools. And there's another, Helen does something similar. Someone was a request to see one of the slides again, which was the most used social media sites. Sarah, you could probably just read them out. Would you mind just reading out what the top 5 were, if you can probably remember?
Well, I know. Thank you for putting me on the spot with memory. But we know that it was TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp, Now I've gone blank.
No,
So
it was Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, WhatsApp, and YouTube.
okay, John cheated. He was looking at the slide, but there you
go. Very good. I'm delighted. Baljit is saying he's been promoting Brainwaves lessons for a while now. I'm delighted to see that, Baljit. Thank you very much for doing that. Right, let's go have a quick look to see if there are any other specific questions for John and Sarah. And I think this is the sort of, I suggest we go back to the question I mentioned from Natalie Palmer right at the very beginning, which is about how one might suggest increasing a young person's sense of agency. And I'm just quickly going to say that all of the Brainwaves lessons attempt to do that. So it is one of the founding principles of the education materials that in every case we try to give a little piece of data or information, a little piece of science, if you like. Sometimes we give a scenario and we ask people to think about how they're responding to that piece of information. So the Brainwaves lessons tend to be have a little bit of science, but they're quite light really in scientific content, but they're very much focused on young people discussing amongst themselves how they would respond to that information. So that is giving a sense that they have some choices that they can use in order to do that. But were there any other clues in the data, you think, or areas for further research that might help us to understand ways in which we could help young people to improve their sense of agency other than education? Or do you think really there's a lot to be done on the education front? John, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I would like to address that. On the one hand, obviously, part of what we've done today, shown today, is to provide the evidence that this is important. Okay. Yeah. And when, you know, it's in science, if you don't measure something, it doesn't exist. Okay. So we've measured it and we've not only shown it exists, we've shown that it's important. And that to us is a real finding. So now that we know it's important, we can think, okay, what should we do about this? And one of the next stages of the program will be to test interventions designed to improve agency. Okay, but where would we look to think of clues as to how that would happen? Well, I think there are several tools that really young people would like to have. They would like to have an ability to think critically. And what we hope to do in the future is to create a website which has data, which has these data in a simplified form that they can actually play with themselves, and they can discover through their own analyses, through their own questions, what affects what. You know, I can, you know, when I was a bit younger with young boys, I could say, you really should go to sleep early. You know, yeah, Dad, forget it. But actually, if they looked at the data and they found, oh, the people who go to sleep earlier, okay, and not up gaming, they feel better, they perform better, etc., perhaps it's something I want to do as well. So we're hoping to encourage this sense of discovery. I think another issue is, if you like, a structured existence, a structured, disciplined life with a sense of purpose to it. Now, we're not necessarily, obviously, saying what that purpose should be, but nevertheless, you know, if you want an organizing principle for organizing the plethora of data, the chaotic, complex world in which you live, having a purpose is where it begins. So to actually help people, young people, to think those sorts of deeper, non-consumerist questions, we think would be a really important part of this program.
And a lot of that is about getting beyond yourself, isn't it? So we very much in different Brainwaves modules and lessons encourage engagement with your community or with your other generations in your family, or it may involve, some people find that through their religious affiliation or through something else that is meaningful to them, a sort of a cause that is beyond themselves.
Yeah.
Now, Sarah, your Eiley James is asking a question, which have you been aware, are you aware of the Glasgow Motivation and Wellbeing Profile, which the GMWP, there you are, there's another candidate, which is specifically for agency. She's put the, Eiley has helpfully put the link in the question, so I'm going to, I've copied it, and that might be, you can add that to, I have to say, one of our, as you can imagine, we asked young people, I believe, 230 questions, is that right? Something like that.
Yeah.
So the bun fight that was going on about which questions got in and which questions couldn't be asked is something to behold, because we, at the beginning, the truth is you don't know what all of the nuances might lead to, and over time it may be that we can evolve the questions in order to be more efficient, to use the questions more efficiently, and then be able to get in other questions. So if I explain that reasonably.
Yes, you did. That's really good. And also what we've done today is we've presented on things like total score. And as you saw from that agency questionnaire, there are 8 questions which, with further analyses, we can divide them into schools and family. We can look at individual questions. So when it comes to intervention and guidance, further analyses will actually help us with those interventions and that information.
Great. And there's a question for Maria. Is there another solution for coping with low mood other than exercise, less social media, etc., or seeking help? And I'm going to direct you, Maria, if you go to the Brainwaves lessons, there is a lesson exactly about this, and there are some very, very useful strategies that we recommend. I mean, one of them, for example, is scheduling positive activities that so you ask young people to think about positive activities that they really enjoy or that makes them feel better, maybe listening to a certain music artist or whatever, and then they schedule that in to their week, so that you know that you've got these points. There are other things around actually thinking about the positive, the things to be grateful for, that we, there's at The Day, which is an organization that is one of the partners of Brainwaves. We help young people think about the news and discuss the news and put themselves in other people's shoes. And that also is helpful when you're having a sense of context. But please do have a look at the Brainwaves lessons. There's lots of resources there. Right, we're just coming up for the last couple of minutes. I think it would be helpful. We've had a couple of questions in the chat asking how to become a research school. So I think I can share that. I'm going to do that. I am going to share that. Yeah. So if you are if this has piqued your interest, this webinar, and you're interested in becoming a research school, then do please get in touch with us. It's a very important part of the ethos of Brainwaves that we really work closely with the schools in order to prepare the school effectively, so that the teachers who are conducting the questionnaire, the data capture, because essentially it happens in classrooms, in one lesson, 1 hour lesson, as we suggest. We very strongly believe in giving the young people information about the study and how it's used and the benefits of it, so that they can consent in an active way with proper information. And what we've learned is that really matters to them, that young people are very willing to take part because of the benefits for their younger peers and future generations. And there's a really strong altruistic motivation for taking part, which is in itself a positive thing. So we would really encourage you to put it in the chat, and one of our team will get in touch if you would like to, if you're interested in finding out more about that. And you'll see on this slide, there is something called an image of the Brainwaves Cohort Study Report. Now, for the first time, when our pilot schools took part in the pilot study, we produced a report which just showed how their cohort differed from the whole cohort, and where, for example, they may be showing higher levels of anxiety in a particular school, then points them to relevant resources that may be useful in helping that. Now, I know from conversations with head teachers that that's been incredibly useful for the research schools as a way of trying to get to grips with what is a really quite a deep problem, and trying to understand how we can start to think about it, looking at some of these relationships. So that is those individual reports for the school cohort are obviously only available for research schools. But as I said earlier, all of the Brainwaves lessons, all of these webinars, all of our teacher support material, that is free to everyone. You just have to register on the website and you can use it. So I think that being said, I'd like to thank you all so much for attending. Absolutely fantastic attendance of the webinar today. And my thanks and appreciation to John and Sarah, our two professors who are going to be diving ever deeper into the pool of data that is being collected, which will grow and grow and grow. And I'm excited that in November we should have our second data collection, where we will have hopefully round about double the number of young people taking part. So that's very exciting. So thank you all very much for attending. Thank you, John and Sarah. Good night, everybody.